Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany and happy Halloween. Today is my 4th annual October horror film video project. This originated a few years ago because as somebody who's a former evangelical and grew up really religious, I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies and had seen basically nothing until I was an adult. And it's been a really interesting and cathartic and fun process for me now to start going back and seeing a bunch of things that I hadn't seen in the past. So I will link a playlist with the 3 other videos up above if you want to go and check out the years previously. But this year is a very special year because of the ongoing SAG AFTRA strike. As I'm filming this, they still have not reached any kind of a bargain, although I am hoping that we'll see some movement on that soon since the writer's strike seems to be about to end, so fingers crossed for them. But in support of the strike, I have not been covering any media from struck companies. So because of that, for 2023, you are getting all movies from A24. A24 is a fantastic indie movie studio that has quite the array of well-known horror films. In fact, last year I watched 2 films from A24 and they were among my favorites. Those were Midsommar and Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. So if you want to see my reactions to those, you can go and check that out. But this year I have picked out 5 A24 horror films that I'm going to be watching and reacting to in this video. As I'm filming this, it is the end of September, and tonight I am going out to watch the very first movie that is still in theaters with a friend, and then I will be back to give you my thoughts. And I'll make sure that I put timestamps in the video below so that you can hop to see my discussions on whichever movie you are interested in. Heads up, these are going to be spoiler-filled discussions, so if there's anything you want to skip that you hadn't seen yet, you are more than welcome to do that. So without further ado, let's take a look at the lineup of A24 horror films that I'm going to be watching this October. Beginning with the one that I'm going to see in just about an hour, this is Talk to Me. This is a movie that I think is about grief, and it's a bit of a twist on a creepy party game. In this, we've got an embalmed hand and a party game where people touch the hand and get spirits to speak through them, and it seems like the main character has recently lost her mom, and so that's one of the issues in the movie. So I don't know much more than that. I've just watched the trailer. I haven't really watched anybody talk in depth about this, but I'm interested to see what it is. So I'm going to see that tonight in theaters with a friend. The rest of them I will be streaming. Next up, we have X. This is the prequel to Pearl, which I am interested in seeing, but I don't think I'm going to do it this time unless I just have some extra time and really feel like it. But this one I think is like a horror comedy set in the 1970s, following a group going to make an adult film at this farm, and there's like a killer old woman. I think the big thing about this one is that Mia Goth, I believe, is the main actress, and she plays both the young woman and this old woman and fights herself, which is quite an accomplishment. So I'm curious to see how that one goes. People really seem to like these though. Next up is Saint Maud, and this one is currently available for free on Amazon Prime. Given my own religious background, I had to go with this one. I just think it looks really interesting. It's about a hyper-religious young woman who is providing hospice care to an atheist who I think is like kind of messing with her head. I don't know, it looks pretty wild. We'll see how it goes. Next is The Blackcoat's Daughter. This is one that I've seen on some lists as one of the most underrated horror films from A24, and one that you should go in not knowing too much about. So I've tried not to read too much. The only thing I know about it is that it's set at a boarding school, and it follows 2 teen girls who are left behind by their families over the winter holidays. That's all I know. We'll see. Then for the final installment, I decided to let my patrons vote on which movie I should watch. They got 3 options, and the one that was definitely the winner was The Witch. This is a historical horror film that does look really creepy and seems to also have kind of religious undertones. It'll be interesting to see what I make of that. So those are the 5 A24 horror films that I am going to be watching this October, and I will be back to discuss Talk to Me once I've seen it. Last night I went to see Talk to Me, and I've got to say I didn't realize how much more of an intense experience it would be to see this kind of a film in theaters as opposed to at home. Because I've only just started watching horror movies in the last few years, and a lot of them have been for this project, most of them are movies that I've streamed in my living room. And yeah, they might be scary, but you know, like, you're at home, you can pause it, you're not in front of this like giant screen that feels so all-encompassing. And so it was just a very different experience, because I don't know that Talk to Me is the scariest film I've seen by any means, but it hit me a lot harder than I was expecting, and I think it was being in the theater watching it. This was very intense. I had gone in expecting something a little bit more lighthearted. The fact that the premise is based on this sort of party game, and I knew it would have something to do with grief because we knew that the main character's mom had died, but I did not realize just how sad and bleak it was gonna be. The fact that her mom died by suicide is a big thing in this. It was intense. I think it starts off a little bit light, although even then, the creep factor builds, and I think that the actress who plays the main character does a fantastic job of that, because even in scenes where things are supposed to be fine and happy even, or close to normal, she's able to evoke this like subtle creepiness factor that I think is really effective, and obviously that is heightened in certain scenes of the movie, but I think her performance was really good. This was definitely wild. I have not yet looked up any director interviews or commentary on the film, so I'm not aware of what has been said already about it. But one thing that stood out to me, and I don't know if this was intentional, if it's trying to say something specific, but I found it interesting that almost the only characters of color are our main character and her immediate family. There is one other guy who isn't black, but isn't white either. But our main character is a black woman. Her mom has died by suicide. Her dad dies, she dies, and the white family that supposedly took her in is fine at the end of this. I mean, traumatized, sure, but alive and okay. So contextually, this film was made in Australia with Australian actors, and it feels very much Australian, and I don't think that I am familiar enough with the sort of social dynamics and politics of Australia to know what exactly this film was trying to do from a race perspective. I would imagine that it's intentional. I just don't know enough to know what exactly it was trying to do with that, and I would be curious to hear from anybody who does know this, and maybe if you're from Australia, I know I have viewers from Australia, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll probably do a little bit of research after this. But that is something that definitely stood out to me, and given the fact that other than her family, almost everybody else is white, and they're mostly the ones who end up dead, I feel like it's gotta be intentional, but who knows? I don't know. To be fair, at the beginning of the film, you do get a little bit of backstory on the hand, and you see how it devastated this other family beforehand, where somebody ended up stabbing his brother and killing himself, and you learn more about that later on in the film. The hand itself is interesting because nobody really knows where it came from. There is this mythology around it, and in some of the early shots that have close-ups on the hand, you can see that there's writing. They say that perhaps it was the dismembered hand of a medium who could see the dead that was encased in porcelain, but nobody knows this. Nobody ever tries to break the porcelain, so we don't really know if it's an actual hand or what the deal is, but it's been passed from friend group to friend group after devastation as this sort of party game, right? Where they light the candle, they hold the hand, they say, talk to me, and then I let you in, and they're, you know, for 90 seconds or whatever, inhabited by this spirit, and everybody films it on their cameras and thinks it's funny and hilarious. And I do think that this is really smart, because while I'm watching this and I'm like, oh my god, it would never be me. This is so stupid and so dangerous, and letting a kid who's like 14 do it, obviously you know that's gonna go wrong. But what it did make me think about was the way that there are younger people especially who have done really dumb stuff because it's gone viral on TikTok. This reminds me of the time when there were these viral videos on TikTok about people cooking chicken in NyQuil, which is number one, gross, but number two, very, very dangerous. And in fact, the FDA had to come out with a official statement warning people not to do this because of how dangerous it is. But because this went viral on TikTok, there were a bunch of people doing it. And that's not the only incident like that of people engaging in obviously dangerous, stupid behavior where they haven't really thought through the implications of what they're doing because of a viral video. And, you know, this is to like a greater and lesser extent. And it feels like this film with this kind of party game that's getting filmed, everybody thinks it's really funny when it's actually much more serious. It kind of goes hand in hand with some of that. And I think that that's a really smart use of technology in a horror film. So this movie is partly about grief. Our main character has lost her mom, and she thinks that her mom accidentally took too many pills, but as it turns out, her dad had been withholding information from her that her mom had left a note and had died by suicide. And I am not somebody who's personally lost someone close to me by suicide, but I know that there is a special kind of trauma that goes with that. And I think this film is trying to explore some of it. There's a scene where we see our main character watching a video of her and her mom before where they're being silly, and her mom seems happy and seems great. But then you see in the note that she left behind that this moment was the first time that she had felt peace in a really long time, and that now she wouldn't be in pain anymore. And you just see the discord between those two things. And I think that that's part of what can be hard, is when people feel like, I should have known, I should have seen what was going on. How did I miss the signals? And the truth that sometimes maybe there aren't signs that you were going to be able to see, but also that her dad withheld that information from her thinking it was protecting her, when in fact that ends up being the beginning of her downfall and what ends up destroying her. And that is incredibly tragic. I came out of this movie just feeling really sad. Really sad for this girl, really sad for this family. But I do think it's a really effective film. And I do think that the final scene of the film is smart and a little bit of a lighter note to end it on, which you need because you just went through this really depressing, traumatic movie. But there are definitely visual cues from the beginning of the film that you see repeated at the end of the film. At the beginning of the film, she's driving and they see a kangaroo that's been hit by a car and is almost dying, and she just can't deal with trying to put it out of its misery and leaves it behind, laying in the middle of the road. And then at the end of the movie, we come full circle where she now has stepped out into traffic and we see her lying in the middle of the road, being, I guess, put out of her misery. I don't know. It's dark, man. This is like a much darker and more sad and tragic film than I was expecting it to be, honestly. But then in the final scene, we see her holding somebody's hand when he says, "Talk to me," and now she's the spirit on the other side, right? Who now may influence things in whatever way. Going back to the grief thing and the difference between what we know and what we don't, and the complicated relationships with parents, is this, what she thinks at least, is the spirit of her mom is lying to her, telling her what she wants to hear and not telling her the truth that she is avoiding and not wanting to hear from her dad. So this supposed spirit of her mom is telling her, no, of course I didn't do it on purpose. Of course I would never leave you behind. I'm so proud of you. You're doing the right thing by trying to kill this kid and put him out of his misery. Like, right, like it's like stuff like that where she is being told what she wants to hear in order to push her to do more and more destructive things, because she isn't able to hear and accept the truth from her dad and find catharsis. And in the end, that ends up kind of destroying everything. And it's a tragedy. It's definitely a tragic film that is dealing with much heavier issues than I went in expecting. That said, I thought it was really well done, it was very smart, and there were a lot of excellent performances in this movie. So those are my thoughts on Talk to Me, film number 1. I will be back once I have watched another one of these films. Hello, I have watched The Witch and I am back to discuss. I will admit it's been a few days since I saw it because I got my COVID booster and flu shot and just wasn't feeling super great for a couple of days and did not really want to film anything, but I'm here to discuss The Witch. Okay, this was interesting. It was definitely not what I was expecting. Based on the previews, I thought this was gonna be scary, and it wasn't really scary. Like, I get it, I get what it was doing. It does have witches in it, but like the witches are a metaphor for misogyny and the fear of independent women and the fear of young women's burgeoning sexuality. I'm like, I get it. I did like it. It was really interesting seeing Anna Joy from Queen's Gambit in this. Oh, I forget her last name, but she's much younger in this role playing the main character. And don't get me wrong, it is creepy and weird and suspenseful at times. At other times, darkly humorous. There are some choices that the movie makes that I kind of laughed at, and I don't know that I was supposed to laugh at them, but I did. So the premise of this is it follows a Puritan family that has been kind of cast out of their community for we don't know what exactly, except for the fact that the man of the household was prideful and I don't know, something. So they're now living out on their own, isolated, and they are hyper religious, but at the same time, part of what we see is the intense hypocrisy of the dad in the family. So this is following a family. They live near these woods that are haunted by a witch. So there's the dad, the mom, the oldest sister, the like 11 or 12-year-old brother, maybe. I feel like maybe that's how old he's supposed to be. I don't know. He looks younger, but I feel like that's what we're aiming for. 2 twins that are probably like 6 and a baby. So 5 children and the parents. Their oldest daughter, we find out later, has recently begun menstruating. And I feel like that is kind of the linchpin of this entire movie. We have some really uncomfortable scenes that never go beyond just being uncomfortable, where her younger brother is clearly aware of her sexually because they're isolated and there's nobody else around, and he's probably starting to hit puberty. So that's weird and uncomfortable, but it doesn't go anywhere with it. That said, we do see as things heighten and heighten is that the mom is feeling really threatened by her daughter. She's young, she's pretty, she's got this burgeoning sexuality and independence, and the mom is not only worried that she's gonna like seduce the son, but also the husband, and it's like a loss of power for her, I guess. And in some ways the mom's story is really tragic, because what you get with her is that her entire sense of identity and personhood is wrapped up in the men in her life, even extending to her father, because there's this whole thing about this silver cup that she inherited from her dad that her husband stole and sold, while allowing the daughter to take the blame for it. And so it's really interesting in terms of the gender dynamics between the mom and daughter, but then also these siblings who are super isolated, and the really intense religious indoctrination that the dad is teaching to the kids, while at the same time mirroring super hypocritical behavior, right? So we have a scene of him walking in the woods with his son, the woods that they have always been told to avoid, and the woods that he later lies about having been in to his wife, right? But reminding his son, you know, that we're all sinful and we always will want to sin, and we have no control over whether God lets us into heaven or not, and whether God is gracious with us. We just do the best that we can. So it's this like really intense version of Christianity, teaching kids that from the time you're infants, like, you are just inherently bad and evil and sinful, and you will always want to be sinful, right? And then you see the impact of what that teaching has on the kids and their interactions with each other and their behavior. Like, you can see the negative impact on the family as he's teaching these things to the kids. So early on, we have a moment where the daughter is watching the little baby, which is interesting too, right? With like usurping her mom's place. She's the one watching the baby that her mom had. She's playing peekaboo with it. She opens her eyes and the baby's gone. The witch from the forest has snatched it away. We get like a scene hinting at violence towards the baby, and then it cuts away and we see her like pounding something up and then putting blood on herself. So like there's implications of violence that are kind of horrific, but we don't see it actually play out. And in general, that's the thing about this movie, is there's a lot of implied violence, but not that much graphic violence, or if you do get it graphically, it's really brief. So this isn't really that intense of a movie or that scary of a movie in some ways, and it's very obvious that it's all a metaphor, right? I just found it really interesting. And ultimately, this is the story of the daughter. The daughter is the one who survives to the end of the movie. She is the one who takes her liberty and makes a deal with the devil, which, like, I mean, it's kind of cheesy. It's like the goat, the black goat, is the devil, but then like she's talking to the goat as the devil, and then we see this like, I don't know, Inigo Montoya looking Spaniard type man walking behind her. I don't know, it's interesting. And she follows him out into the woods where there's all these naked women dancing around a fire, and then they start floating into the sky, and then she joins them and floats naked into the sky, and that's the end of the movie. I was like, okay, I get it. We get it. She took her independence. It was kind of, I don't know, like, it's kind of cheesy. I think this came out in like 2016. Like, I get what he was doing, and overall I did like the movie, but there were a couple of scenes that I was like, okay, this is kind of funny. There is a moment too before the dad dies where she is finally kind of confronting him with his hypocrisy and telling him, like, you know, maybe our family would be okay if you could do more than just chop wood, because we constantly see him chopping wood, chopping wood, chopping wood. And then we see this giant stack of wood piled next to the house, and he dies by getting wounded and falling into the wood, and the wood all falls on top of him. So, like, I guess cosmic karma, I guess, or something, that he, like, dies from all the wood he chopped. I don't know. Yeah, this was an interesting one. I liked it. It just wasn't what I was expecting. I feel like this could be a really good one for people who don't like horror that much or can't do super scary horror, because this isn't really that scary. There are some creepy scenes, and it also is reproducing some of the kinds of things that happened in the Salem witch trials, except what if they were real? Like, that's part of the conceit of the film. You know, like people having these fits when they're witches, or like making deals with the demon in his black book. So it's taking, like, just like, again, kind of funny in a dark way, right? It's taking all of the accusations made towards women at the Salem witch trials and then literalizing them, but as a metaphor for female sexuality and independence and misogyny. So, so that's The Witch. It was an interesting experience. I will be back once I've watched another one of these movies. Hello, I am back and I have watched yet another movie. Last night I saw The Blackcoat's Daughter, and this was interesting. It's another one that honestly isn't that scary. I don't know, maybe it's because like, some of the movies that from A24 that I've seen have gone so hard with stuff that I keep expecting things to be scarier or go some farther places than they actually do. Whereas this is one that I think does a better job of building suspense. I mean, there is violence and gore and some like terrifying things do happen, but it's really more building this sense of eeriness and creepiness and like wondering if you're gonna see something weird in the reflection of a mirror, even if you don't. But it is a lot of like people looking in mirrors and reflections, which I think is an interesting decision. This is one I had to think about a little bit in terms of what is this film about? What is it trying to say? And then of course I was like, am I right about what I think it's doing? And so I went and looked up some articles, and at least some people seem to agree with me. So I feel like I did get the vibe correct. So The Blackcoat's Daughter follows three main characters, and For the most part, it takes place at this Catholic girls' boarding school. There's a holiday break happening and two students have been left behind by their parents, and it kind of takes place over that period of time for the most part. So we have this big empty institutional school building where everybody mostly is gone for the holidays except for these two girls and a few staff members, right? Which I think adds to the creepiness factor. So there is possession slash demon worship stuff in this, I guess, but ultimately I think this movie is about loneliness and abandonment and the trauma that that can do and the harm that that can cause to people. I also think the performances were really good. The girl who plays the freshman is so creepy. Like, she does a really good job from the get-go, just being weird and kind of creepy. But she has started seeing like a demon or something, and then starts getting these weird staticky phone calls, and we don't find this out until much, much later. Like, this is all stuff that's revealed much later in the film, but she starts getting these weird staticky phone calls from a demon saying that she can stay there with the demon forever and she should kill everybody else left. And it progresses from there. Part of this is like a mystery thing where it's not a straightforward narrative. The timelines are kind of wonky and things are really moved around to delay reveals. So I guess this girl had been having visions or a sense that her parents were going to die. That's confirmed that her parents have died. And she, one night, while this other girl, who's like the pretty popular girl, goes out with her boyfriend to tell him that she's accidentally pregnant and like is trying to deal with that, the younger girl, I guess, ends up in the basement, like praying in front of a radiator. I don't know. I think that's where she like communes with the demon. And after that, she's super creepy and like weird stuff is happening. And then she ends up killing and cutting off the heads of the two nuns that are there with them, and then eventually the pretty popular girl. But the thing is that the movie is bookended by scenes of her being abandoned, and then there's more of it in the middle of it. So first, her parents left her as a young woman at this boarding school, right, where she doesn't really have any kind of a support system. At the very beginning of the movie, the first scene, we have her in the office with a priest who had been encouraging her and getting ready for this recital she's going to do, and then telling her that he's not going to be able to make it because he's got to go to Albany and he won't be able to make it back in time for her recital. And she's clearly really hurt by that. And that's the first moment where she's like looking over in a corner kind of smiling, and I think maybe that's when she first sees this like demon or whatever thing is the implication of it. But it's because yet another adult figure in her life is abandoning her before a major event, and that continues to happen. The headmaster of the school tells the older girl, you're supposed to take care of her for tonight until her parents come back, but instead the girl goes off to be with her boyfriend, and the younger girl is yet again abandoned. So she does all of these things, invites in this demon, I guess, follows what it says to do, killing these people and beheading them, so then has like the heads with her worshiping the demon, I guess. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But then what's tragic is there's this other timeline, right, with this older girl who we see through some flashbacks killed a nurse to escape from an asylum type deal and is trying to get somewhere, possibly get back to the town where the school was. And she ends up getting picked up and offered a ride by a couple who turn out to be the parents of the pretty popular girl. And when we realize that, that's when we also realize that this is a different timeline. It's set many years in the future. There's some weirdness with the girl's dad, but it doesn't go anywhere. Thankfully, there was a moment where I was like, this is weird, but no, okay. But then they're taking her supposedly past where the school was, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna be sick, gets them to stop the car, kills both of them, cuts off their heads, sticks them in a suitcase, and walks to the school, which has now been abandoned. And I'm like, why? Why is she doing this? Because then we had seen too that as a little girl, after she was caught with the original murders, because of course it's the same it's the same girl, right? And you realize that. It's like, this is the older version. So this is the same person who killed your daughter. Now she's killing you. And I was like, why is she doing this? Is she trying to get back with the demon? Because there was an exorcism back right after she was first caught. And the priest who abandoned her at the beginning then also got rid of the demon and was like, leave her and never return. So she's being abandoned yet again, ends up in this asylum. I mean, it's kind of a tragedy, I guess, in some ways, but also she killed a bunch of people. So she like has their heads in a suitcase, carts them to the school, goes to the basement, and sees that the school is abandoned, the boiler is no longer functioning, and there's no way for her to get this demon back, which was, I guess, her only hope of human connection, I suppose, is how she felt. And then the last scene is her crying and screaming in the middle of the street because she's alone again. So, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately I feel like it is a movie about the harm of isolation and parental abandonment, but also the abandonment from parental figures and what people might go through when they feel completely alone and uncared for. Hopefully not murder a bunch of people, but in this case, that was what happened. It was kind of wild because I was like, is she still possessed? Is that why she's killing these people? But no, I think she thought that maybe if she did the thing and cut off their heads like the demon told her to do the first time, she could get the demon back and she wouldn't be alone anymore. And that did not work out for her. So, yeah. That was the Blackcoat's daughter. I would not say Blackcoat's daughter is really that scary. It's more suspenseful and eerie with, like, you know, like some scenes of more intense violence, but a lot of times it looks away from things. There are a couple of intense scenes of her like stabbing people repeatedly, which is kind of disturbing. But I mean, compared to some of the other movies I've seen from A24, like Midsommar, for instance, it's fine. 2 films left to go. I will be back once I have watched another one. Hello. Last night I watched Saint Maud, and wow, was that a ride. Let's talk about it. This film is following a young woman who is a nurse who we see very briefly kind of some disturbing flashback, maybe. I think at the beginning you're not really sure if this is a flashback or if this is a look at things to come, but I think we figure out eventually it is in fact a flashback of something had happened. And now she's starting this new job as an in-home carer for a woman who is dying of stage 4 cancer. And at some point recently, Maud had undergone this major religious conversion, and she believes that God's purpose for her taking this job is perhaps to save the soul of this woman who is dying and who is an atheist and a lesbian. And it just keeps getting more and more weird and kind of ratcheting up the tension and what's going on. And I think what's interesting about this is that it's not entirely clear, and I think this is on purpose, whether you're watching a deeply disturbed young woman having a mental breakdown through the course of the film, or whether you're watching something actually supernatural but not good happening. And I think you could argue, given the ending of the film and the very final split-second clip where she's set herself on fire, first you see her as this like glowing angel with wings, which is what she thinks is happening, and then you get a split second of like a burned corpse screaming in agony. And, you know, like you could take from the ending that a lot of this is her hallucinating stuff, that none of it is really real. Or you could interpret it as being that there was some kind of a demonic presence that was toying with her, that pushed her to do what she did at the end. And the film kind of leaves it intentionally vague. There are a lot of really disturbing scenes of her engaging in extreme sort of physical discipline. And the thing that's wild about this, right, is that there are sects of Christianity that have a history of like using physical pain as a way of disciplining your body. That there were people who would whip themselves in prayer and like create lashes, or as we see her do in this film, kneel on rice or things like that to pray because it hurts your knees and something about the pain is supposed to be beneficial. And so that's part of what we're playing with here. But then we see her go to extremes, and one of those extremes you even see a little bit in the preview for the film, which is putting like thumbtacks on a saint's picture, putting them in the bottom of her shoes, and then walking around town on top of them, which is just like horrifying. I think the performance that she gives is really good, and there is a really strong undercurrent as well of sexual tension between her and this woman. That is interesting because you contrast it with these later moments of her engaging in sexual activities with men and just being so entirely shut off from what's going on and so obviously like disassociating from it. It's, you know, it's like you have to wonder if part of it is that she's been in denial about who she really is, or what. I mean, she clearly has like, there's some serious mental illness going on where she needs help and help that she's not getting. And that's part of what ends up being so disturbing about it. But she has these moments where she says she's feeling the presence of God and she looks like she's having an orgasm. This, again, is tied into some real religious history of these ecstatic spiritual experiences that people would have and young women would have under the influence of the Holy Spirit. And you can question, like, well, was it really that? Or was it, you know, was something else going on? And this is kind of playing with that in these extreme ways. And then that tying into the sort of sexual tension between her and the woman that she's caring for and trying to save the soul of. You get this obsession and this darkness of something that is on the surface supposedly just religious or spiritual. And you know, it's interesting because as a person who grew up evangelical, I did spend time in circles where there was almost this like Jesus is my boyfriend type energy where your love for God or your relationship with God was not just this sort of like vague spiritual love, but could be this deeply romantic love that could sustain you through being single. And there were elements of that that had the same kind of weirdness to it that I think you see so much more intensely and more explicitly in what Maud is doing. And we also find out that her name is not really Maud, or her original name was not Maud, because she runs into somebody from her previous workplace and we find out that her name is Katie, but she's been going by Maud. And hence I think like Saint Maud is the whole thing, is a lot of times, you know, people who become nuns or priests or saints would take on a different spiritual name. And so clearly that's kind of what she's done for herself, taking on this different identity. And I do think that the visuals of this are so incredibly effective, and it's such a creepy film in a way that I think really works, because the other thing that I think is really important about what this film is in conversation with is the relationship between spirituality and approaches to mental health. Because another thing that I think is unfortunately true in a lot of Christian circles, not all, but a lot, and certainly a lot of the evangelical circles that I kind of came up in, is sometimes there can be this idea that, well, if you are having mental health issues, you don't need therapy and medication, you just need prayer. It's like a demon that needs to be cast out, or you just need to spend more time with God, or like there's sin that you need to get rid of, when in fact maybe no, there is an actual real problem that needs to be addressed through medication and therapy and other forms of support. And that can be incredibly harmful to people who are mentally ill. And I think that's what we're seeing happen in this film, is we have a young woman who is very disturbed, and because she says that so much of this is coming out of her sense of spirituality, she's not getting the help that she so clearly needs. And we see how harmful that is. It's not totally clear what happened previously, but my best guess based on the couple of flashbacks that we get is that she was doing CPR and accidentally pressed too hard and like killed a man. I think that's what happened. We don't really know. We don't see in detail what happened at the hospital she used to work at. When she meets the coworker's like, really, you're still nursing? And they know what happened, and then later apologizes for the way that she had treated her. But yeah, clearly something went wrong, and Maud should not have been still doing what she was doing, or Katie. I just think it's wild because you see it escalate and escalate and escalate to the point at which she's wearing sheets as these robes as if to mimic artwork of saints, and, you know, goes to this woman's home after she no longer works for her. And that moment, there's a moment where the woman's face turns demonic that I was like, oh my God. And again, this is that thing where it's playing with, is it her hallucinating because she's so deeply unwell, or is there actually some demon possessing the body of this dying woman, right? And then she like stabs her to death, douses herself with like acetone or whatever, and sets herself on fire on the beach. Like, it's just, it's wild. It is a wild ending. But I think a really fantastic film. The performances in it were excellent, and I'm glad that I watched this one. I don't know that I knew entirely what to expect out of it, but I think it's doing some really interesting things and is in conversation with some really important issues in what can happen, the darker side of certain forms of spirituality and Christianity. So I did like it. I will be back once I have watched the final film, and then we will wrap this video up. Last night I watched X, so I am ready to discuss it and then wrap up this video. So I saved X for last because it seemed like it had the most potential to be fun of all of the movies on the list this year. It's the one that falls most into the horror comedy category and has kind of slasher vibes to it, which is just a little bit more fun sometimes than these haunting psychological and domestic horror type things. And I was right, it did have some of those vibes. However, I came out of X with some really mixed feelings that I want to talk about. And there is an asterisk here because I know that it came out the same year as Pearl, which is the prequel film. And knowing what I know about Pearl, I have a suspicion that I might feel better about both movies together once I see that than having just watched X. But I still want to talk about some of the things I have some questions about. X is set in Middle America in 1979, and it follows a group of people who are renting out a kind of bunkhouse on a farm for a night in order to shoot a porn film. It's a slasher film. The farm is owned by an elderly couple, and they have not informed them that they are going to be shooting this film, but slowly things get more and more creepy and then start to go very, very wrong. So on the film crew, we have Maxine, played by Mia Goth, who also plays Pearl, the old woman, and plays the young Pearl in the prequel film. So put a pin in that because we're going to come back to it. That I think is an intentional choice that's really interesting. But we have Maxine, who's this kind of ingenue young woman who is in a relationship with the producer of the film who left his wife for her. That's a whole mess. Oh, this is interesting. I'm not enough in this that I realized until I looked this up, but apparently the character Jackson is played by Kid Cudi, who is a rapper. That's super interesting. So he is the male performer in this adult film that they're making called The Farmer's Daughters, right? Where there's the two daughters. There's Bobby Lynn, who's the blonde actress, then there's the brunette actress, and then the producer dude, a film student who's gonna be shooting and editing the film because he wants to make, you know, an elevated version of a dirty film, and his girlfriend who ends up deciding she wants to be in the film, and he's just like devastated over that, which is also such an interesting thing. Oh my God. Okay, this is the thing about this movie, is there are things that I really like about it and then a couple things that I didn't love. But I do think that the way it approaches this double standard that the boyfriend has is pretty amazing, because he's totally fine with shooting this porn film with these women who are performing and are in romantic relationships with different people and are like, yeah, it's different when it's on camera, whatever. But the moment that his religious girlfriend wants to do it, he's like, oh my God, no, but she's different. She's a good girl. She's a nice girl. The producer's like, I hate to break it to you, none of them are nice girls. I think the way that it handles that is pretty excellent. It's also kind of tapping into interracial dynamics in some interesting ways. And I don't know, some of the ways that they approach sex and sexuality, I really enjoy, with a major caveat. So there is a moment about halfway through the film where the girlfriend is arguing to be in the film, and he's like, what? No, the plot's written, the movie can't change halfway through. We've already like filmed so much of it. And she's like, why not? You love Psycho and that had that. He's like, yeah, but that's not what this is. And of course it's kind of fun because it's an overt nod to the fact that this is the turning point. This is when everything's about to get real. People are going to start dropping like flies. And we know that they're going to die because we have the opening scene with the sheriff arriving and seeing, you know, blood everywhere, bodies, but we're not sure who the bodies are until later in the film. So we know things are going to go really bad from the beginning. I also thought it was pretty clever. They have this reference to Psycho. Pretty soon after, there's a scene where the boyfriend is crying in the shower. And so, of course, because of the reference, you're like, oh God, is he gonna get, you know, killed through the shower? And he doesn't, but it builds tension so that when he does get killed by the old woman, Pearl, it is unexpected and it's kind of like built up this tension. So that I thought was really smart. Here's where I have more mixed feelings though, is that in some ways this film is overtly trying to talk about our fear of aging and about how life may not go the way that we want it to, the challenges of aging. And granted, like, our aging people are terrible, you know, they murder and torture people, but there's some mirroring going on, right? With the same actress playing the old woman Pearl and this young actress, and the weirdly sensual interactions between the two of them and the way that that all goes is kind of interesting. And I suspect if I watched Pearl as well, there would be more added into that, of this idea that you might end up somewhere that you don't think you're going to be. You might end up becoming a person that you don't think you're going to be one day. And that, I think, is doing something interesting, something we could unpack. What I didn't like about it is that this film is at once trying to critique the way that we talk about aging, while at the same time having some major scenes of horror where the horror of the scene hinges upon the assumption that people are going to be grossed out by old people being sexual. And that I don't like. That really rubbed me the wrong way, because there are a couple of scenes in particular that are played as horrific. And on the one hand, they would be horrific regardless, just because it's creepy, right? That this killer woman is getting into bed with this other young woman when she doesn't know it in the middle of the night and touching her. That's creepy. But the way that it's shot and the way that they sort of play it is that what's really horrifying about it is that she's so old and looks so old next to this beautiful young woman. And I don't know. I don't know how self-aware the film is of what it's doing, and the fact that it's kind of playing to the same thing that it's ostensibly critiquing. And then there's a scene where she's hiding under the bed and the old people are having sex. And again, she has this look of disgust on her face, like she's like grossed out, like, oh my God, these like creepy old people are having sex. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it because why should anybody at any point in their lives be denied that kind of pleasure if that's what they want and that's something that they're still interested in? And why should that be something gross or horrific? I don't know. I mean, just to be fair, these characters in particular don't deserve much because they're pretty terrible people who've killed a lot of people over the years and done some horrible things. But that was an element of the film that it rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't necessarily like the way it approached things. Both of these characters, it's not just that they're old, it's that they are old and look like death walking. The amount of prosthetics and the thinness of the hair and like all of the specific ways that they do it is so over the top. You see what I'm saying? I'll put some pictures in here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But it's so over the top. And, you know, Mia Goth is this young woman who is in a lot of prosthetics playing this much older version of herself. And there are moments that are just tragic, moments where you see her trying to dance after having killed someone. So like she just killed this dude and she's partly upset because, and I guess this is where I'm like, it's commenting, but also still doing the thing it's commenting on, where she's partly upset because she's trying to come on to these young dudes and they're like, ew, gross, get away from me, you're old, kind of thing. And so she kills them. And so simultaneously it's talking about the way that, especially with women, I think, we idolize youth and beauty and how older women can sometimes be kind of forgotten and lost and viewed as not desirable or not attractive. And that is harmful, except she's also, you know, serial killer. That's driving some of this. But at the same time, it's still like just reifying the same thing it's critiquing. So what is it really doing? I don't know. All that to say, it is a pretty good movie. I generally had a pretty good time with it, but there were some scenes that I was deeply uncomfortable with the way that it was handling those issues. So I came out with a lot of feelings. I feel like this is gonna be a beast of a video to edit and it's gonna be so long, but let's take a look back at the 5 A24 films that I watched this month. I'll tell you, when I started this, I was nervous about the fact that X was the only sort of horror comedy on the list and everything else seemed much more serious. I was a little concerned that things were gonna be too scary for me, and in general, I don't think that was the case. I think the movie that freaked me out the most and that I think I had the most intense emotional reaction to was Talk to Me. And I don't know how much of that was the movie itself and how much of it was the experience of going to see it in theater. I feel like that probably amplified, but also it was just really dark and devastating and sad and had some like pretty horrific moments in it. So I don't know that I expected Talk to Me to end up being the scariest movie that I watched this month, but I would say that it was. I do think all 5 of these were really good, and in general, A24 just makes really high quality, interesting films that are generally trying to say something and do something a little bit different from things that we've seen before. We had some movies dealing with death and grief. We had a couple that were dealing with loneliness and abandonment, religious trauma and mental illness, and then, you know, a slasher, but also we're gonna talk about youth and aging. maybe not in the best way all the time, but we're gonna do something with it. So overall, a very positive experience. I think I got something out of each one of these movies, and I'm glad that I saw them. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for your question of the day, I would love to hear if you have watched any of these films. Which of them were you a fan of? Did you agree with my thoughts? Did you have different experiences? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.